On the shoulder of a deserted highway in the Pantanal, a powerful businessman drags his paralyzed son in a wheelchair, who desperately pleads, "Father, please don't leave me here." With coldness, he calculates, adjusts his silk tie, and abandons him in the dense fog while tears stream down the young man's face. The father gets into his luxury car and accelerates, disappearing around the bend. When the terrifying silence takes over and despair seems insurmountable, the sound of an old engine approaches. But what happened 3 years later on that phone call changed everything. If stories of overcoming obstacles and transformation touch your heart, subscribe now to our channel so you don't miss any moving narratives like the one we're about to share today. The dense morning fog covered the deserted highway, cutting through the Florida Everglades, turning the landscape into a gray, humid watercolor. The powerful roar of the black SUV's engine broke the silence of that Thursday morning, its xenon headlights piercing the mist like spears of light. In the back seat, Ethan slept with his head resting against the window, the constant rocking of the vehicle keeping him in a restless sleep. His 19 years seemed too heavy on that young face, marked by 2 thin scars on his forehead, a permanent reminder of the car accident that had changed his life 2 years prior. Thomas Miller adjusted the rearview mirror, watching his son for a few seconds. His eyes, the same dark brown as Ethan's, showed no emotion. They were predator's eyes, calculating and cold, accustomed to evaluating people as if they were cost-benefit spreadsheets. The businessman slowed the vehicle as the GPS indicated the exact point he had marked during his research the night before. Mile marker 127 on the I-75, the most isolated stretch between Naples and Fort Lauderdale. No nearby properties, no gas station for at least 50 miles in either direction. The car stopped smoothly on the shoulder. Thomas took a deep breath, his manicured hands gripping the leather steering wheel for a moment before turning off the engine. The sudden silence woke Ethan. "Are we there, Dad?" The young man's voice was hoarse with sleep, his eyes still trying to focus on the dark environment outside. "We're here." Thomas opened the driver's door and got out, his impeccable Italian suit an absurd contrast to the wild landscape around him. Walking to the back of the vehicle, he opened the trunk with mechanical movements, revealing the foldable wheelchair, the most expensive model on the market naturally. After all, Thomas Miller didn't spare expenses when it came to appearances. "Dad, what are you doing?" Ethan was now fully awake, confusion quickly turning into apprehension when he saw his father assembling the wheelchair on the shoulder. Without answering, Thomas opened the back door and, with the efficiency of someone who had repeated the gesture 1,000 times, positioned himself to transfer his son. His hands, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, now performed the task with clinical precision, without a hint of affection. "Dad, please tell me what's going on." Ethan's voice trembled as his father placed him in the chair, adjusting his paralyzed feet on the supports with the same indifference with which he would organize papers on his desk. Thomas stepped back, straightening his navy blue silk tie. It was an automatic gesture, something he did whenever he was about to close an important deal. And this, he thought, was just another necessary transaction. "Ethan," he began, his voice maintaining the same tone he used in board meetings, "you know I've always been a businessman. Every decision I make is based on cost-benefit analysis." "Dad?" Ethan tried to interrupt, but Thomas raised his hand, the imperious gesture of someone accustomed to having the final word. 2 years. It's been 2 years since the accident. Physical therapy, specialists, imported equipment. Do you know how much that cost? More than $3 million. He checked the expensive watch on his wrist. "And what was the return on that investment?" Ethan felt as if he had been hit in the stomach. "Return? I'm your son, not an investment." "Everything in life is an investment, Ethan. I invested in you, hoping that one day you would take over the family business. But look at you now." Thomas gestured towards his son's immobile legs. "What kind of image do you project to our partners, to our competitors?" Tears began to well up in Ethan's eyes, but he fought to hold them back. He wouldn't give that satisfaction to the man he had once called father. "Scarlett is pregnant," Thomas continued, referring to his second wife, 25 years his junior. "A boy. Healthy. Perfect. the air I need for the empire I've built. So that's it? Ethan's voice was choked. You're going to abandon me here because I'm not you perfect anymore? Don't be dramatic, someone will pass eventually. Do you have your phone? You can call whoever you want. Thomas walked back to the car. Just don't call me or anyone connected to the family business. Dad, please! Ethan tried to push the chair forward, but the wheels sank slightly into the dirt shoulder. Don't leave me here. I promise I won't get in the way. I won't. Thomas was already inside the car, starting the engine. Through the closed window, Ethan could see his father's impassive face, checking the mirrors before driving. Oh, wait. Dad! Ethan's desperate cry echoed through the foggy morning as the SUV sped away, leaving only a cloud of dust and the smell of diesel exhaust in the air. Ethan stayed there, paralyzed not only physically but emotionally, watching the car's taillights disappear into the fog. When the last trace of the vehicle vanished, when the sound of the engine was lost in the distance, the reality of his situation hit him with brutal force. Alone, abandoned, on a deserted highway in the middle of nowhere. The tears he had held back began to fall freely, mixing with the moisture of the fog that was starting to condense on his face. His hands trembled as he tried to process what had just happened. He looked around, the Everglades landscape stretching in all directions. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the fog with orange hues, but the beauty of the scene only accentuated his despair. How could he appreciate nature when he had just been discarded like trash by his own father? The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of the local fauna, the chirping of waking birds, the croaking of frogs in a nearby pond. Sounds that would once bring him peace now seemed to mock his situation. Ethan tried to reach for his phone in his pocket, but his hands trembled so much that he almost dropped it. The screen showed 2 signal bars, enough to make a call. But to whom? All his contacts were somehow connected to his father's business. School friends? He had lost touch with most after the accident, when his social life practically ceased. As he fought against the rising panic, a different sound cut through the air. The distant rumble of an engine, not the smooth, powerful roar of a luxury car, but something rougher, more worn. Ethan raised his head, hope and fear battling in his chest. The fog began to part like a curtain, revealing the outline of an old pickup truck. Its white paint faded by the sun and age. The vehicle slowed, as if the driver was evaluating the unusual scene. A young man in an expensive wheelchair, alone on the shoulder of a deserted highway. The truck stopped a few feet away. The driver's door opened with a metallic squeak, and a figure emerged. A middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a light blue cotton shirt and faded jeans. Her warm brown eyes studied Ethan with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "My son," her voice had the characteristic accent of rural Florida, soft and maternal. "What are you doing here alone at this hour?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. How to explain that his own father had abandoned him as if he were an unwanted object? The woman approached, her steps careful but determined. As she got closer, Ethan could see the lines around her eyes, marks of someone who smiled frequently. There was something about her expression that radiated genuine kindness. "You don't have to say anything right now," she said gently, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "I can see you've been through something difficult. My name is Mary, Mrs. Mary, as they call me at the lodge." Ethan, he managed to murmur between the tears that still flowed. Mrs. Mary nodded, her eyes quickly scanning the expensive wheelchair, Ethan's designer clothes, the absence of any luggage or belongings beyond the phone in his trembling hands. She had lived long enough to recognize the signs of abandonment, even when they came packaged in luxury. "Ethan," she repeated the name with affection, as if she had known him for years. "You're cold. The fog this morning is wetter than usual. How about getting in the truck? I'm going to my lodge near the Everglades National Park. You can rest there, have a hot coffee, and then decide what to do." I don't have any money," Ethan began, but Mrs. Mary gently raised her hand. "Who said anything about payment? Sometimes, my son, the Lord puts people in our path not by chance, but on purpose. I came this way today because I woke up with a feeling that I should. I usually take the turnpike, it's faster, but something told me to come this way. Her words had a quiet conviction that touched something within Ethan. For the first time since he saw his father's car disappear, he felt a flicker of hope. "Come on," Mrs. Mary said, standing up. "I'll help you get in. The truck is old, but it's spacious. We can put the chair in the back." As she moved to help him, Ethan noticed a small wooden cross hanging from the rearview mirror of the truck, swinging gently. It was simple, worn by time, but obviously cared for with affection. With practical but gentle movements, Mrs. Mary helped Ethan transfer to the passenger seat. Her touch was completely different from his father's cold, efficient hands. There was human warmth there, genuine concern. After placing the wheelchair in the back and covering it with a tarp to protect it from the moisture, Mrs. Mary returned to the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, a completely different sound from the smooth purr of the SUV, but somehow more comforting. "The trip to the lodge takes about 2 hours," she said, adjusting the rearview mirror. "You can rest, sleep if you want, or talk if you prefer. Sometimes it helps." Ethan looked out the window as the truck began to move. The fog was starting to dissipate under the rising sun, revealing the Everglades landscape in all its wild beauty. It was ironic, he thought, how the worst day of his life was being framed by one of the most beautiful sunrises he had ever seen. "Mrs. Mary," he said after a few minutes of silence, his voice still shaky, "why are you doing this? You don't know me." She smiled, a smile that lit up her whole face. "Knowing someone goes beyond knowing their name or their story, Ethan. Sometimes we recognize a soul in need because we ourselves have been lost, and when we are lost, that's when God finds us." Ethan wasn't particularly religious. His father had always said that the only religion that mattered was profit. But there was something about the way Mrs. Mary spoke about faith that was different. It wasn't preaching or imposition, but a lived, experienced conviction. As the truck drove down the road, leaving the site of the abandonment behind, Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't know what awaited him. He had no idea what his future would be like now that he had been expelled from the only life he knew. But for the first time in a long time, perhaps since the accident, he didn't feel completely alone. The road stretched ahead, disappearing into the horizon where the sky met the land. A new day was dawning over the Everglades, and with it, perhaps, a new chance at life. The Everglades landscape gradually transformed as Mrs. Mary's truck continued down the road. The sun, now higher, completely dissipated the morning fog, revealing flooded fields dotted with islands of vegetation where white egrets patiently fished. Ethan observed everything with tired but attentive eyes, as if seeing that land for the first time. "First time in the Everglades?" Mrs. Mary asked, noticing his interest. "No. My dad has properties around here, but we always traveled by helicopter or in cars with the air conditioning on." Ethan paused, realizing the irony. "I never really saw any of this." "It's a special land," Mrs. Mary said, slowing down as they passed a small wooden bridge over a creek. "The Everglades teaches humility. During the wet season, the water commands everything. During the dry season, it's the land that imposes its rules. We just learn to live with both." They traveled in comfortable silence for some time, broken only by the constant rumble of the engine and the occasional bird song. Ethan noticed how calmly Mrs. Mary drove, braking to let turtles cross the road, waving to the rare vehicles they passed, going in the opposite direction. "My lodge is just past Everglades City," she explained when they passed a sign indicating 30 miles to the town. "It's small, simple, but welcoming. I started 15 years ago after..." She paused, her fingers lightly gripping the steering wheel. "After God showed me my purpose." Ethan wanted to ask more, but something in her tone suggested that story would come at the right time. Instead, he asked, "What kind of guests do you get?" "All kinds," Mrs. Mary smiled. "Fishermen, researchers, tourists. But in recent years, more people like you have been coming." "Like me," Ethan frowned. "People who need time, space, healing." She looked at him briefly. "Not just physical, you know. Sometimes the soul needs more care than the body." The paved road gave way to a well-maintained dirt road. The truck bounced gently over the small bumps, and Ethan had to hold on to the handle above the door. With each jolt, he felt the reality of his condition, the legs that didn't respond, the body that depended on constant support. We're almost there, Mrs. Mary said, noticing his discomfort. About 10 more minutes. As they approached, Ethan saw a hand-painted wooden sign, Hope Springs Lodge, where faith finds rest. Just ahead, among leafy trees, a cluster of simple but well-maintained buildings emerged. The main house was single-story, with a wide porch surrounded by trellises where purple and white bougainvillea intertwined. Around it, there were smaller cabins, all adapted with access ramps. A well-tended garden with stone paths led to a small wooden chapel under the shade of a centenary oak tree. Mrs. Mary parked near the main house. "We're here," she announced, turning off the engine. "Home, sweet home." Before Ethan could respond, the front door opened and a young woman appeared. She was about 25, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing an apron over jeans and a t-shirt. "Mom, I was worried. You took longer than usual." The young woman stopped when she noticed Ethan. "Oh, you brought a guest." "Sarah, my daughter," Mrs. Mary introduced. "She helps here at the lodge. Sarah, this is Ethan. He'll be staying with us for a while." Sarah nodded with a warm smile, already moving to help. "Welcome, Ethan. I'll get cabin 3 ready. It's the most accessible one." As the two women coordinated transferring Ethan to the wheelchair, he observed the activity of the lodge. An elderly gentleman was reading a newspaper on the porch. 2 men were talking animatedly about fishing near a gazebo, and a family with children was playing in the garden. "Is it always this busy?" Ethan asked when he was settled in his chair. "Today is calm," Mrs. Mary laughed. "Last weekend we had 2 groups of birdwatchers, a documentary crew, and 3 families. It was a blessed madness." She led him up the gentle ramp to the porch. "First, let's get some coffee. I bet you haven't eaten anything today." The lodge's living room was cozy, with rustic wooden furniture, colorful cushions, and paintings of local landscapes. A bookshelf filled with books occupied an entire wall, and in a corner a small altar with candles, fresh flowers, and an image of Christ. "Sit down." Mrs. Mary indicated the table near the window. "Sarah, bring that cornbread you made this morning, and fresh coffee." While they waited, Ethan noticed details he had missed at first glance. The grab bars discreetly installed on the walls, the wider-than-usual hallways, the absence of rugs that could hinder a wheelchair. "The lodge is adapted," he observed. "Yes," Mrs. Mary nodded. "When I decided this would be a place of welcome for everyone, I meant everyone. God doesn't make distinctions between his children, why would I?" Sarah returned with a steaming tray. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filled the room. She served with caring efficiency, lightly touching Ethan's shoulder as she placed the cup in front of him. "Thank you," he murmured, surprised by the emotion he felt at that simple gesture. "You're welcome," Sarah smiled. "If you need anything at all, just call. I'll get your room ready." Alone with Mrs. Mary, Ethan held the warm cup between his hands, letting the heat penetrate his cold fingers. The bread was delicious, moist, and slightly sweet, nothing like the elaborate pastries his stepmother ordered from French bakeries. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Mrs. Mary asked gently after a few minutes of silence. Ethan looked out the window where he could see part of the garden and, in the distance, the reflection of the sun on a pond. How to explain that his father had treated him like a defective product to be discarded? "My dad," he began, his voice failing. He took a deep breath and tried again. "My dad left me on that highway because I became a burden." Those were his words, a burden to his business. Mrs. Mary showed no surprise or judgment. She just nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I had an accident 2 years ago. Car. I was good, you know, competed, won awards." Ethan laughed bitterly. "My dad loved showing off the trophies to his business partners. 'My son, the champion,' he'd say." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "The accident changed everything. Spinal cord injury. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but I would never walk again. My dad spent a fortune on treatments, always looking for the miracle that would make me normal again. And when he realized the miracle wouldn't come," Mrs. Mary finished softly, "he found a cheaper solution. The new wife is pregnant. A healthy son, perfect. The ideal heir to the Miller empire." Tears began to fall again. 2 years of pretense, of false hope, and in the end, I was discarded like trash. Mrs. Mary reached across the table, covering his hand. Her touch was warm, maternal. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Ethan?" He shook his head no. "I see a strong young man who survived not only an accident, but 2 years of disguised rejection. I see someone who, even in the most difficult moment, maintained his dignity, and I see," she paused, lightly squeezing his hand, "I see someone God brought to my door for a reason." "I'm not religious," Ethan said quickly. "My dad always said that." "I'm not talking about religion," Mrs. Mary interrupted gently. "I'm talking about faith. They are different things. Religion is what we do. Faith is what we are. And you, dear, have more faith than you imagine. Otherwise, you wouldn't have survived this far." She stood up, walking to the window. "Do you know why I named this place Hope Springs Lodge?" Ethan shook his head. 15 years ago, I was a physical therapist in Miami. Promising career, my own practice, plans to expand. But my daughter Sarah, then 10 years old, was diagnosed with a degenerative disease. The doctors gave her 6 months to live. Ethan looked in surprise at the door where Sarah had exited. "Exactly," Mrs. Mary smiled. "She's there, strong and healthy. What changed?" "I stopped fighting the diagnosis and started believing in something bigger. I brought Sarah here, to the Everglades, close to nature. I combined my medical knowledge with a lot of prayer and faith." "And she was cured?" Ethan asked, skeptical but curious. "Gradually, without a clear medical explanation. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. I call it a miracle." Mrs. Mary sat down again. "After that, I couldn't go back to my old life. I set up the lodge using my savings. I wanted to create a place where others could find what we found. Peace, hope, and who knows, their own miracle." Ethan processed the information in silence. It was difficult to reconcile the skepticism inherited from his father with the obvious sincerity of that woman. "I'm not saying you're going to get up and walk tomorrow," Mrs. Mary continued. "But I believe you were brought here for a reason. Maybe it's to heal more than your legs. Maybe it's to discover who you really are without the weight of your father's expectations." A bell rang softly outside. "Lunchtime," Mrs. Mary announced. "Shall we go? The food here is simple but made with love, and you need to meet the other guests." As she helped Ethan maneuver the chair towards the dining room, he noticed that for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than pain and bitterness. It was small, fragile as a candle flame, but it was there. A tiny spark of hope. The dining room was a large space with communal wooden tables. About 15 people were already gathered, talking animatedly. All conversations paused when Ethan entered. "Everyone," Mrs. Mary announced, "this is Ethan. He arrived today and will be staying with us for a while." A chorus of welcomes echoed through the room. A stout man with a southern accent pulled up a chair. "Sit here, young man. I'm Joe, from Georgia. I'm fishing for bass, but so far I've only caught catfish." Laughter filled the room. A white-haired woman introduced herself as Mrs. Watson, a retired teacher from New York. "I come here every year. It's my spiritual retreat." The introductions continued. A couple of biologists studying alligators, a pastor on sabbatical, a visual artist seeking inspiration. All different but united by something intangible, a search, a need, a hope. During lunch, baked fish with vegetables and cornbread, Ethan observed the interactions. There wasn't the forced formality of business dinners, he knew, nor the superficiality of high society parties. People laughed, shared stories, discussed everything from politics to the best bait for fishing. "How's your knee, Mr. Adams?" "Mrs. Mary asked a gentleman who limped slightly. "Getting better thanks to God and your exercises," he replied. "Today I managed to walk to the pond without my cane." "Great. Keep up with the stretches I gave you." Ethan realized that Mrs. Mary hadn't completely abandoned physical therapy. She just integrated it into something bigger. After lunch, Sarah took him to cabin 3. It was small but cozy, an adapted bed, a bathroom with grab bars and space to maneuver the chair, a small porch with a view of the garden. "Did you bring luggage?" Sarah asked. No, it was all very sudden. No problem, we have extra clothes, toiletries. Tomorrow we can go to town to buy whatever you need. She hesitated at the door. Ethan, I know you don't know us, but you're safe here. Mom has a special gift for helping people, and I don't just mean physical therapy. Alone in the room, Ethan transferred to the bed with the practiced effort of 2 years. Lying there, looking at the wooden ceiling, he let the events of the day flow through his mind. 12 hours ago, he was sleeping in the Miller mansion, surrounded by luxury but profoundly alone. Now he was in a simple cabin in the middle of the Everglades, abandoned by his father but welcomed by strangers. His phone vibrated. Text message from an unknown number. Hope you found help. The divorce will be final soon. Scarlett and I need to focus on the family's future. Your bank account remains active. TM. Thomas Miller. Not even capable of signing Dad on the final message, Ethan deleted the message and turned off the phone. Through the window, he could see the sunset, painting the sky orange and pink. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing a guitar, and voices were joining in a song he didn't recognize. He closed his eyes not to pray, he didn't know how yet, but to simply exist in that moment. The abandonment still hurt, the betrayal still burned, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely lost. Maybe Mrs. Mary was right. Maybe there was indeed a purpose in being there. Maybe the end of one life could be the beginning of another. The first weeks at Hope Springs Lodge passed in a routine Ethan never imagined living. He woke up to the chirping of birds instead of digital alarm clocks, had communal breakfast instead of alone in his suite, and spent his days between physical therapy sessions with Mrs. Mary and moments of reflection in the small chapel. Let's work on those upper body muscles, Mrs. Mary would say every morning, guiding him through adapted exercises. Her professional touch never lost its maternal kindness. Strength needs to come from within, Ethan. Body and spirit work together. Cabin 3 gradually became his refuge. Sarah had brought him books from the lodge's library, biographies, novels, even a Bible that Ethan occasionally flipped through, more out of curiosity than conviction. The formerly bare walls now displayed some drawings he had started doing, rediscovering a forgotten teenage talent. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after his arrival, when something extraordinary happened. During the morning session in the adapted physical therapy room, Mrs. Mary was working on his legs as she always did, passive movements to maintain circulation and prevent muscle atrophy. "Ethan," she suddenly said, stopping the movement. "Did you feel that?" "Feel what?" He was distracted, watching a flock of colorful birds that had landed in a nearby tree through the window. "Close your eyes. Concentrate." Ethan obeyed, closing his eyes and trying to focus on the sensations in his body. Mrs. Mary lightly touched his right calf, and then he felt it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniable, a tingling sensation. Like when a foot falls asleep and begins to wake up, only softer, more distant. His eyes opened in shock. I felt something." Mrs. Mary didn't show exaggerated surprise, just smiled knowingly. "Let's test it more." She spent the next few minutes touching different points on his legs, and Ethan could feel, not always, not everywhere, but there was definitely sensation where before there was only emptiness. "This is..." "The doctors said that..." Ethan struggled with the words, with the hope he didn't dare name. "Doctors say what they know," Mrs. Mary replied calmly, "but there are things that go beyond medical knowledge. Your body is responding, Ethan. Slowly, subtly, but it is responding." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every few minutes he would touch his legs, trying to confirm that he hadn't imagined the sensations. The next morning during breakfast, he couldn't contain the news. "I felt something in my legs yesterday," he announced to the table where Joe, Mrs. Watson, and other regular guests gathered. "Praise the Lord," exclaimed Mrs. Watson, clasping her hands. "That's wonderful, son." Joe slapped him on the back enthusiastically. "I told you this place has something special." Pastor Henry, the evangelical minister on sabbatical, smiled gently. "Sometimes God works through the right people at the right time. Mrs. Mary has blessed hands." The news spread through the lodge. Throughout the day, people came to congratulate him, share their own stories of overcoming, offer prayers. Ethan, who had spent 2 years hearing condolences and receiving pitying looks, now received hopeful smiles and words of encouragement. "I don't want to create false expectations," Mrs. Mary warned him during the afternoon session. "Nerve recovery is unpredictable. It can take time, there can be setbacks, but it's a start. It's more than I've had in 2 years, Ethan replied, looking at his legs with new perspective. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why weren't you surprised? When I felt the tingling, you smiled as if you expected it." Mrs. Mary paused, the exercises sitting beside him. "Last night during my prayers I felt that something would change. It's not always like this, it's not a guarantee, but I've learned to trust these feelings. God speaks in many ways, Ethan. Sometimes through science, sometimes through intuition, always through love." The following weeks brought small but constant progress. The sensations became more frequent, more defined. Ethan began to distinguish between light touch and pressure, between hot and cold. His daily exercises gained new intensity, new hope. A month after that first tingling, during a particularly warm afternoon, something even more significant occurred. Ethan was in the chapel, a place he had started frequenting not to pray, but to find silence and peace. The small space, with its simple wooden benches and rustic cross, offered a refuge from the intensity of his emotions. He was alone, observing the sunlight filtered through the improvised stained glass windows, colored bottles that someone had artistically incorporated into the windows. He thought about his father, the life he had left behind, the uncertain future that lay ahead. "Why me?" he murmured to the silence. "Why abandon me? Why save me?" The questions echoed in the small space. Ethan closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in emotional exhaustion. And then, without warning, he felt it. Not a tingling sensation this time, but movement. Minimal, almost imperceptible, but real. The toes of his right foot had moved. "Mrs. Mary," he shouted, forgetting where he was. "Mrs. Mary." In minutes, the chapel was filled. Mrs. Mary arrived running, followed by Sarah, Joe, Pastor Henry, and others. Ethan, tears streaming down his face, pointed to his feet. "Move them again," Mrs. Mary instructed calmly. "Concentrate." The silence was absolute as everyone watched. Ethan closed his eyes, visualizing the movement, commanding muscles that had ignored his commands for 2 years. And then, a tremor, a spasm, but definitely voluntary movement. The chapel exploded in exclamations of joy. Mrs. Watson began to cry. Joe shouted, "Miracle!" Pastor Henry began a prayer of thanksgiving. In the midst of the joyful chaos, Mrs. Mary kept her hands on Ethan's shoulders, anchoring him in the moment. "Breathe," she whispered in his ear. "Feel the blessing, but keep your feet on the ground. It's one step on a long journey." That night, the lodge celebrated. It wasn't customary to make a fuss about individual guests' progress, but the energy was too contagious to contain. During the special dinner, Sarah had prepared her famous seafood gumbo. Stories flowed. "I came here after losing my wife," shared Mr. Adams, the gentleman with the problematic knee. "Deep depression. I didn't want to live. Mrs. Mary showed me that grief is love with nowhere to go, and that there's always room for love. My daughter was addicted," a woman named Rosa revealed. "We tried everything. Here she found peace to fight her demons. Today she's been clean for 3 years. Story after story, each one a testament that Hope Springs Lodge was more than a place. It was a turning point, a new beginning." Ethan listened to everything in reverent silence. Until a few weeks ago, he would have considered these stories cheap sentimentality. Now, with his own toes timidly responding to his commands, he understood that there were realities beyond the spreadsheets and projections that had dominated his previous life. "And you, Ethan?" Pastor Henry asked gently. "Do you want to share something?" Ethan looked around the table at the friendly faces that had become his new family. I spent 2 years believing my worth was in my legs, that without them I was disposable. My dad abandoned me because I couldn't be the perfect heir anymore." He paused, his voice choking. "But maybe he did me a favor, because here with you I'm discovering that my worth goes far beyond what I can or can't do physically. I'm learning about faith, about community, about unconditional love. Amen, several voices responded. And today, Ethan continued, a smile lighting up his face. Today I move my toes. It's not much, but it's everything. It's hope. Mrs. Mary raised her glass of juice. To hope, she toasted, and to the daily miracles that sometimes come in small movements. After dinner, Ethan went to the chapel, this time not to seek silence, but for something more. He knelt awkwardly in his chair, his hands resting on the bench in front of him. I don't know if you're listening, he began, his voice a whisper in the sacred space. I don't even know if I exist in the way Mrs. Mary believes. But if you do, thank you for the abandonment that brought me here, for the pain that opened me to healing, for the strangers who became family. He remained silent for long minutes, not expecting a response, but feeling for the first time the presence of something greater than himself. When he finally left the chapel, the stars shone brightly in the clear Everglades sky. From his porch, in cabin 3, Ethan watched the night sky. Somewhere in some luxurious mansion, Thomas Miller must have been closing deals, counting profits, ignoring the sun he had discarded. But here, under the stars, Ethan felt richer than he had ever been in his father's house. He moved his toes again just to confirm he could. The movement was minimal, almost pathetic compared to what he used to do. Perfect jumps over obstacles, runs through the property, dances at gala parties. But it was his. It was real. It was the beginning. Thank you, he murmured to the night, not knowing exactly who he was thanking. God, the universe, Mrs. Mary, or perhaps all of them. The night wind carried the distant sound of Joe playing the guitar on the main porch. The melody was simple, but beautiful, like everything in that place. Ethan closed his eyes and let the music lull him, his toes moving slightly to the rhythm, silently celebrating the miracle of being alive, of having hope, of belonging. Tomorrow there would be more exercises, more challenges, more small progress. But tonight, it was enough to know that the impossible had become possible, that abandonment had become welcome, that the end had become a beginning. 6 months had passed since that foggy dawn on the deserted highway. Cabin 3 at Hope Springs Lodge now truly felt like home for Ethan. The walls displayed his drawings, Everglades landscapes, portraits of his friends at the lodge, sketches of his own hands holding objects he couldn't even feel before. Physical progress was slow but steady. Ethan could now move not only his toes, but also slightly flex his ankles. With the help of Mrs. Mary and improvised parallel bars in the garden, he could stand for precious minutes, his legs trembling with the effort but responding. Strength comes from within, Mrs. Mary repeated during the morning sessions. Your body is relearning, Ethan, like a child discovering the world. It was true in more ways than she imagined. Ethan was relearning not only the connection with his body, but with his soul. The mornings in the chapel were no longer a silent refuge, but moments of intimate conversation with a God he was beginning to know. The prayers, once empty words memorized in childhood, now flowed naturally. One afternoon in August, while Ethan was doing strengthening exercises on his cabin porch, Sarah appeared with the lodge's cordless phone. "Call for you," she said, a curious expression on her face. "It's from New York. A woman. Said it was urgent." Ethan frowned. Very few people knew where he was. He had kept minimal contact with the outside world, just enough for banking and bureaucratic matters. "Hello? Ethan Miller." The female voice was professional but had a touch of nervousness. "Yes, speaking. My name is Dr. Emily Carter. I'm a neurologist at New York Presbyterian Hospital. I'm calling because of your father." Ethan's stomach clenched. "What does he want now?" "Mr. Miller, your father has been hospitalized for 3 days. He suffered a stroke. He's conscious, but..." She paused. "He's partially paralyzed on his left side." Silence stretched. Ethan processed the brutal irony of the situation. "Why are you calling me?" he finally asked. He asked. It's the only name he can pronounce clearly since the stroke. "Ethan, call Ethan. Our social worker found this number after a lot of searching." Ethan closed his eyes. 6 months. 6 months since the abandonment, and now Thomas Miller was paralyzed. possibly in a wheelchair, experiencing a fraction of what his son had lived through for 2 years. What's the prognosis? Difficult to say. With intensive physical therapy, he might regain some movement. But, again the pause, he refuses to do any treatment, he just keeps repeating your name. I see. Ethan looked at his own legs, which were slowly coming back to life. Tell him that I'll think about it. Mr. Miller, forgive me for insisting, but your presence could make a difference in his treatment. Sometimes unresolved emotional issues affect physical recovery. The doctor had no idea of the depth of that truth, Ethan thought. Thank you for calling, doctor. I'll be in touch. He hung up before she could insist further. His hands trembled holding the phone. Sarah, who had stayed nearby, sat beside him. Bad news. My dad. He had a stroke. He's paralyzed. Oh, Ethan. Sarah gently touched his arm. What are you going to do? I don't know. He looked out at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. Part of me wants to let him experience the abandonment he imposed on me. Another part. Remember what Jesus said about forgiving 70 times 7? Sarah smiled gently. Mom always says that forgiveness is more about freeing ourselves than absolving others. Ethan spent the night awake, alternating between the chapel and his room. The memories of the abandonment were still vivid. His father's coldness, the cruel words, the desperate loneliness. But now, there were other memories. Mrs. Mary stopping in the fog, the community welcoming him, the small daily miracles. In the morning, he looked for Mrs. Mary in the medicinal herb garden. I need to go to New York, he announced without preamble. My dad had a stroke. He's asking for me. Mrs. Mary stopped pruning the rosemary and looked at him attentively. And what does your heart say? It's divided. He abandoned me when I needed him most. Now he needs help and you are not him, Mrs. Mary completed. You are who you have become despite him, or perhaps because of him. I don't understand. She sat on a nearby bench, gesturing for him to come closer. Ethan, if your father hadn't abandoned you, where would you be now? In the mansion, probably depressed, isolated, without knowing your own strength, without discovering faith, without this family we've built here. She took his hands. Sometimes God uses winding paths to take us where we need to be. Your father intended evil, but God turned it into good. So I should go? You should follow your healed heart, not your wounded heart. If you go, go as who you are now, not who you were then. 2 days later, Ethan was on a plane to New York. Joe insisted on accompanying him. You don't go to these battles alone, son. During the flight, Ethan alternated between prayer and anxiety. The contrast upon arriving in New York was shocking. After months in the Everglades, the city seemed chaotic, suffocating. New York Presbyterian Hospital, with its sterile corridors and hurried staff, was the opposite of the tranquility of the lodge. Dr. Carter received them personally. Thank you for coming. Your father is in room 1205. I need to warn you, he's changed a lot. What do you mean? Physically, he's stable, but emotionally, he seems like a different man. The arrogance is gone. There's something like, she searched for the word, remorse. I can't explain it. Ethan took a deep breath before entering the room. Joe squeezed his shoulder. I'll be out here, brother. The first sight of Thomas Miller was shocking. The man who had always been impeccable now lay in the hospital bed, the left side of his face slightly drooping, his left arm immobile on the sheet. His eyes, however, were alert, and upon seeing Ethan, filled with tears. Ethan. The voice was slurred, but clear. Ethan maneuvered his chair closer to the bed. For long moments, father and son just looked at each other. Years of hurt, abandonment, and now this brutal reversal of roles hung in the air. Hi, Dad. Thomas tried to speak more, but the words came out jumbled. Frustration and despair crossed his face. With enormous effort, he managed to pronounce forgive. Ethan felt his own tears coming. This broken man in the bed was so different from the cold businessman who had abandoned him. Had the paralysis changed him, or was there something deeper? Why did you call me, Dad? Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating. Lonely, scared. No. You know about loneliness and fear, Ethan interpreted. Thomas nodded vigorously. Yes, Dad, I know. I lived it for months. But do you know what I discovered? Ethan paused, choosing his words. I discovered that God never abandons us, even when people do. I discovered that family goes beyond blood. I discovered that our worth is not in what we can do, but in who we are. Thomas listened, tears streaming down his face. He tried to move his paralyzed arm, frustration evident. Do you want to do physical therapy? Ethan asked. Thomas shook his head no. Why? Punishment, he managed to articulate. Punishment. You think you deserve to be paralyzed for what you did? Thomas nodded, more tears falling. Ethan leaned forward. Dad, let me tell you a story. When I got to the lodge, I met a woman named Mary. She taught me that God doesn't punish, He transforms. What you see as punishment can be your chance for rebirth. He spent the next hour telling him about the lodge, about Mrs. Mary and Sarah, about Joe and the others. He told him about the first sensations returning, about his toes moving, about standing on the parallel bars. Thomas listened attentively, occasionally nodding. You know what else, Dad? I forgive you. Thomas's eyes widened, disbelief evident. It's true. It took time, a lot of prayer, a lot of internal struggle. But I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free. And you do too. How? Accept the physical therapy, not as punishment, but as an opportunity. Each exercise can be a prayer, each progress an act of gratitude. Ethan smiled. I have a better idea. Why don't you come spend some time at the lodge when you're discharged? Mrs. Mary is a physical therapist too, and there you'll understand what I'm saying. The surprise on Thomas's face was evident. He struggled to form the words. She'd accept me. Mrs. Mary welcomes everyone who needs healing, of the body or the soul, sometimes both. Ethan stayed for 2 more hours, talking when Thomas could, sharing silence when words failed. As he left, Dr. Carter intercepted him. I don't know what you said in there, but it's the first time I've seen him motivated since he was admitted. He's asking to start physical therapy immediately. Ethan smiled. Sometimes we need to forgive to heal. It works both ways. Back at the lodge, the reception was warm. Everyone wanted to know how the meeting went, if Ethan was okay. During dinner, he shared the experience. I invited my dad to come here when he's discharged, he announced, causing general surprise. Are you sure, son? Mrs. Mary asked. It's a big step. I am. He needs what I found here. And maybe... Ethan paused. Maybe it's part of my own healing process too. 3 weeks later, an ambulance arrived at the lodge. Thomas Miller, the powerful businessman, arrived on a stretcher, weak and vulnerable. Scarlett didn't accompany him. The divorce had been finalized as soon as it became clear that recovery would be long and uncertain. Welcome to Hope Springs Lodge, Mrs. Mary greeted him with the same warm smile she offered everyone. New stories begin here. Ethan watched his father being settled into cabin 5, adapted for his needs. The circle closed in an unexpected way. The man who had abandoned him for being imperfect now depended on the mercy of others. That night, in the chapel, Ethan knelt. Yes, knelt, leaning minimally on the legs that responded better each. Ethan gave thanks, not for his father's paralysis, never that, but for the opportunity to break the cycle of abandonment and bitterness, to choose love where there had been rejection, to offer hope where there had been despair. Thank you, he murmured, for teaching me that your love transforms everything, even abandonment into embrace, even curse into blessing. Outside, the Everglades slept under the stars. In 2 separate cabins, father and son began parallel journeys of healing. The unexpected call that could have been about death and end became about life and new beginnings. The miracle, Ethan realized, wasn't just about bodies that started working again. It was about hearts that learned to love, about souls that chose to forgive, about lives that were reborn from the ashes of abandonment. Thomas's first days at the lodge were marked by silent resistance. Accustomed to giving orders and having absolute control, he now depended on others for basic needs. Mrs. Mary, with infinite patience, conducted his physical therapy sessions, while Ethan watched from a distance, letting father and therapist establish their own rhythm. "Your father is proud," Mrs. Mary commented after a particularly difficult session, "but broken pride can become humility if we allow it." Ethan watched the gradual changes. Thomas, who had arrived bitter and withdrawn, began to respond to the other guests. Joe, with his outgoing manner, was the first to break down barriers. "Hey, Mr. Thomas, how about some adapted fishing tomorrow? I got some special rods." Joe didn't expect a negative answer. "Ethan's coming too." Father and son fishing, that's a double blessing. The fishing trip was a milestone. Sitting on the edge of the pond with special supports for their rods, 3 men in wheelchairs, Ethan, Thomas, and John, who had returned for a season, shared the contemplative silence that only fishing provides. "Never fished like this," Thomas articulated with difficulty. "Like what?" Ethan asked. "Slow, down, no rush." "That's the Everglades way," John philosophized. "Time is different here. What's important is different." A month passed. Thomas made slow but steady progress. He could partially move his left arm and articulate longer sentences. More importantly, something was changing in his eyes. The corporate hardness gave way to something softer, more human. It was during a joint physical therapy session that the crucial moment happened. Mrs. Mary suggested that father and son work together, each helping the other with the exercises. "Ethan, hold your father's arm while he tries to lift it. Thomas, you do the same with Ethan's legs." The physical contact, initially mechanical, gradually transformed. Ethan felt his father's trembling hands on his legs. The same hands that had abandoned him were now helping him. Thomas felt his son supporting his weak arm. The same son he had discarded was now sustaining him. "Sorry," Thomas managed to say clearly during an exercise. Everything. We've talked about this, Dad. You're forgiven." "No, not just abandonment. Everything. Whole life. Priorities. Wrong." Mrs. Mary discreetly stepped away, leaving father and son alone. "Money as power, nothing this matters," Thomas continued, tears flowing. You matter. Always mattered." Ethan was crying too now. Months of hurt melted in the warmth of that moment. "We're here now, Dad, that's what matters." The following weeks brought accelerated changes. Thomas began to participate in the community prayer moments, first as a silent observer, then joining hands in the circle, finally murmuring his own words of gratitude and repentance. "Never believed," he confessed to Ethan one night. "Thought, nonsense, now only thing. Makes sense." Ethan smiled, remembering his own journey from skepticism to faith. "God has a sense of humor, Dad. He uses improbable paths to reach us." 3 months after Thomas's arrival, another transformative moment occurred. During a typical afternoon, while doing exercises on the parallel bars in the garden, Ethan achieved something extraordinary. He took 5 steps without support. Unsteady, uncertain, but independent steps. Thomas, watching from his chair, shouted with joy, "My son! Walking! My son!" The raw emotion in those words touched everyone present. Mrs. Watson cried, Joe whistled, Sarah applauded. But it was the clumsy hug between father and son, Ethan still standing, trembling, Thomas extending his arms from his chair, that marked the moment. "So proud. Always was. Just didn't know how to show." "I know, Dad. I know." News from the outside world arrived sporadically. Scarlett had had the baby, a healthy boy. She had sent a photo, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of compassion. Thomas looked at it briefly and passed it to Ethan. "Half-brother," he said simply. "Want to meet him?" Ethan asked. "One day, maybe, now. Enough." Thomas's business empire crumbled without his presence. Partners took advantage. Competitors advanced. Curiously, he seemed indifferent. "Built at Castle Sand," he commented after receiving financial reports. "You're building something real." Ethan continued his drawing exercises, now creating an ambitious project. Illustrations for a children's book about overcoming that Sarah was writing. The images showed a bird with a broken wing learning to fly again, an obvious but powerful metaphor. "Talented," Thomas observed, handling the drawings with his recovered hand. "Always were, I just didn't see." A year had passed since the initial abandonment. Ethan now walked with a cane for considerable distances. Thomas had recovered 70% of his movement. More importantly, the relationship between them, destroyed by years of coldness and culminating in abandonment, had been reborn on completely different foundations. "I want to do something," Thomas announced during communal breakfast. His speech, almost normal now, surprised everyone. "I still have resources. I want to invest here." "Invest?" Mrs. Mary questioned carefully. "Not buy, not control, support. Create a fund for people without means. Expand facilities, keep it free." Ethan watched his father with admiration. The man who measured everything in profits now spoke of donating without return. "With one condition," Thomas continued. "Ethan manages it. He understands what matters here." The surprise was general, but Ethan shook his head. "Together, Dad. We'll manage it together. You have business experience. I have understanding of the purpose. Perfect combination." It was decided to create the Hope Springs Foundation. Thomas E. Few would donate a considerable part of his resources, but the management would be communal. Mrs. Mary would continue directing the therapeutic and spiritual aspects. Ethan would coordinate special projects. Thomas would handle the financial sustainability. Ironic," Thomas commented privately to Ethan. "I abandoned you for not serving my business. Now I find purpose in business because of you." The changes were implemented gradually. New accessible cabins were built. A complete physical therapy center was equipped. Full scholarships were offered to people without resources. Partnerships with public hospitals were established, but the spirit of the place remained intact. Meals were still communal, prayers spontaneous, welcome unconditional. Money became a tool, not an end. On a special morning, exactly 18 months after the abandonment, something extraordinary happened. Ethan woke up, did his morning routine of prayers and exercises, and then, without thinking much, got up and walked to the bathroom. Without a cane, without support, naturally. Only when he looked in the mirror did he realize what he had done. "Mrs. Mary! Dad! Sarah!" The house was in a commotion. Thomas arrived as quickly as his recovered legs allowed. Mrs. Mary came running. From the garden, Sarah dropped the coffee pots. "Look!" Ethan walked around the room, down the hallway, into the living room. Steps firm, confident, complete. The celebration was beyond words. Thomas hugged his son, crying openly. Mrs. Mary knelt in thanksgiving. Sarah ran to call everyone. "Complete miracle," Joe shouted. "Praise the Lord," Mrs. Watson exclaimed. Pastor Henry, who had returned for a new season, spontaneously started a hymn of gratitude that everyone joined. In the midst of the joyful chaos, Ethan took his father's hand. "Come with me." They walked, both of them walked, to the chapel. There, before the simple cross, they knelt side by side. "Thank you," Ethan said simply, "for everything, for the abandonment that turned into encounter, for the loss that turned into gain, for the end that turned into a beginning." Thomas, still learning the language of faith, murmured his own words. "Thank you for second chance, for forgiveness, for my son." As they left the chapel, the sun shone over the Everglades. The view from the porch showed the lodge's expansion, new guests arriving, life flourishing where there had only been pain before. "You know what's most amazing?" Ethan commented, observing everything. "What?" Thomas asked. "It's not just our legs that started working again. It's our hearts that learned to truly walk." Thomas nodded, pulling his son into another hug. Two men whom fate had brutally separated were now united by something stronger than blood. They were united by choice, by forgiveness, by rediscovered love. The journey that began in bitter abandonment had transformed into sacred reconciliation, and that, they both knew, was the true miracle. 5 years had passed since that fateful morning on the deserted highway. The Hope Springs Foundation had become a national reference, receiving people from all corners of the United States. What began as a simple lodge in the Everglades was now a complex for integral healing, where medicine, physical therapy, and faith intertwined harmoniously. Ethan walked through the expanded gardens, his stride firm and confident, showing no trace of the paralysis that had once defined him. At 24, he had earned a degree in physical therapy through an online program, supplementing it with in-person specializations. He now coordinated the Foundation's rehabilitation program, applying both academic knowledge and the lessons learned on his own journey. "Good morning, Coordinator," Joe greeted, passing by with his fishing rod. At 68, he had become a permanent resident, the ambassador of joy, as everyone called him. "Good morning, Joe. Are the fish biting?" "Always biting for those with faith and patience," Joe winked, heading to his favorite spot on the pond. Thomas emerged from the administrative center, briefcase in hand, reading glasses on his nose. On the F8, the transformation was complete. The cold businessman had given way to a compassionate manager who measured success not in profits, but in transformed lives. "Ethan, the meeting with the Department of Health is confirmed. They're going to approve our partnership to receive patients from the state program." "Excellent, Dad. Mrs. Mary will be beaming." Father and son walked together to the physical therapy center, where Mrs. Mary, now 67 but with the energy of someone decades younger, was supervising a hydrotherapy session. "Very good, Carlos, a little more. That's it." She encouraged a 16-year-old young man, a victim of a motorcycle accident, who was struggling to regain movement in his legs. Seeing Ethan and Thomas, she waved. "Come meet our new guest." Carlos looked at the two men with curiosity. "Did you guys also get treatment here?" Ethan smiled. "You could say that. 5 years ago, I was in a wheelchair, completely paralyzed. Today," he gave a small demonstration of agility, "I walk, run, even dance when Sarah plays country music at the summer barbecue." "Really?" The boy's eyes shone with hope. "And I," Thomas added, "had a stroke 3 years ago. Left side paralyzed. Today I've recovered 95% of my movement." "How did you do it?" "Hard work," Ethan replied. "Lots of physical therapy, determination, and faith," Thomas completed, surprising even himself with the naturalness of the statement. Here we learned that healing comes from many sources. After the session, the three gathered in Mrs. Mary's office. The walls displayed photos of hundreds of people who had passed through the lodge, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, many standing, smiling, victorious. "Remember Lucas?" Mrs. Mary pointed to a photo. "Paralyzed, attempted suicide. Today he's an adapted physical education teacher in Orlando." "And Fernanda?" Ethan indicated another image. "Guillain-Barré syndrome. They said she'd never come off the ventilator. Married last month, she's pregnant." "Everyday miracles," Thomas murmured, still amazed after all these years. The sound of a helicopter interrupted the conversation. They all looked at each other. They weren't expecting anyone important today. Minutes later, Sarah rushed in. "You won't believe it, it's Scarlett." Thomas paled. His ex-wife hadn't made contact in years since the tumultuous divorce. In the main garden, Scarlett descended from the private helicopter. Still elegant at 35, but there was something different in her posture, a humility that hadn't been there before. Beside her, a boy almost 4 years old observed everything with curiosity. "Thomas," she greeted, then looked at Ethan. "Ethan." "Scarlett," Thomas replied cautiously. "This is Ethan. You're our son." She took a deep breath. "We need to talk." In the meeting room, Scarlett revealed the reason for her visit. Young Ethan had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that affected his motor coordination. The best specialists in New York were pessimistic. "I remembered this place," she said, avoiding eye contact. "What you do here. I hoped." "You want our help," Ethan concluded, without judgment in his voice. Scarlett nodded, tears forming. I know I don't deserve it. What I did to participated in, it was terrible. But young Ethan is not to blame for his parents' mistakes. Thomas looked at the boy, his other son, the perfect substitute he was supposed to be. Young Ethan was playing innocently with a wooden toy car that Joe had carved for visiting children. What do you think? Thomas asked Ethan, deferring the decision to the son he had abandoned. Ethan looked at his half-brother, then at Scarlett, finally at his father. He remembered his own words years ago about forgiveness and second chances. Mrs. Mary, he called, do we have space in the pediatric program? We always have space for those who need it, she replied simply. Scarlett cried openly. Thank you. I'm so sorry. For everything. The following months were a delicate adaptation. Scarlett settled in Fort Lauderdale, bringing young Ethan daily for treatment. Seeing Thomas interacting with his younger son was complex for Ethan, but the emotional therapy they had all undergone allowed them to process feelings without bitterness. He is your brother, Mrs. Mary reminded him during a difficult moment. We don't choose the circumstances of birth, but we can choose how we love. Ethan personally took over young Ethan's physical therapy. The sessions became moments of connection between the half-brothers. While working the boy's small muscles, he would tell stories of overcoming, planting seeds of hope. You will get better, he would say with conviction born of experience. It might take time, it might be difficult, but you will get better. Thomas, observing his sons together, found daily redemption. The son he had discarded was now caring for the son who was supposed to replace him. Irony had transformed into grace. 2 years passed. Young Ethan, now 6, ran through the lodge gardens, his movements still uncoordinated but functional. Ethan had married a physical therapist he met at a conference, bringing her to work at the foundation. Thomas had found genuine peace, dividing his time between financial management and moments of being a grandfather with young Ethan. On a special morning, the foundation received its 1,000th person served for free. The celebration brought together former patients, staff, volunteers, and supporters. The mayor attended, as did representatives from the Department of Health, impressed with the results. I'd like to say a few words, Thomas asked during the ceremony. On the small stage set up in the garden, he held the microphone with steady hands. 7 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I abandoned my son Ethan on a deserted highway because he didn't fit into my distorted vision of perfection. Surprised murmurs went through the audience. The story was known internally, but Thomas had never made it public. This act of cruelty could have destroyed 2 lives, but God, in his infinite wisdom, transformed evil into a miracle. Ethan was rescued by Mrs. Mary and found not only physical healing, but purpose in life. He paused, looking at Ethan in the front row. When I myself was struck by paralysis, my son did what I didn't. He welcomed me. He forgave me. He taught me about true love. Today, 1,000 people have been benefited because an act of abandonment was transformed into an act of love. He pointed to Mrs. Mary, Joe, Sarah, and everyone who had been part of the journey. This foundation exists because people chose to love where there was rejection, to heal where there was wounding, to hope where there was despair. If my story serves for anything, let it be this: it is never too late to choose love. It is never impossible to start over. The applause was prolonged and emotional. Ethan went up to the stage and hugged his father, a gesture that summarized years of transformation. I want to add something. Ethan took the microphone. My dad is right. God transforms tragedies into triumphs, but I want everyone here to know. Every one of you who faces physical, emotional, or spiritual limitations, you are not your condition. You are much more. You are beloved children of God, with infinite purpose and worth. Mrs. Mary joined them, on stage. When I started this lodge, I was just a desperate mother trying to save her daughter. Today I see that God had bigger plans. Every person who passes through here leaves something and takes something. We are one big family, united not by blood, but by choice and faith. The celebration continued until sunset. Testimonies were shared, tears were shed, laughter echoed. Young Ethan played with other children undergoing treatment. his recovery inspiring new patients. That night in the chapel where so many prayers had been offered, Ethan knelt once more. This time, not alone. Thomas was beside him, as was his wife Anne, Mrs. Mary, Sarah and her husband Joe and his family who had come to visit him, even Scarlett and young Ethan. "Lord," Ethan began, "7 years ago I was abandoned on a highway. Today I see that it wasn't abandonment, it was the beginning of a path that led me home. Thank you for transforming our story of pain into a story of healing, our separation into union, our end into an eternal beginning." "Amen," the unanimous chorus responded. As they left the chapel, the Everglades sky displayed its usual symphony of stars. The same vastness that had once seemed threatening to an abandoned young man now embraced an entire community. Ethan held Anne's hand, watching his